Hello, this is Tom Martin, and welcome to another episode of A San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series titled after the book by my colleague here, David Parker. As for myself, I'm a lifelong journalist. I produce stories for Charles Kuralt at CBS News, Diane Sawyer for Good Morning America. Other folks even worked with Walter Cronkite back in my CBS News days. And I love asking thought-provoking questions. I'm always on a quest to learn more. One thing I've learned from really growing up in a journalist family is that, the news of the day is one thing, but without that overarching context, historical reference, it's hard to make sense of it. And it's easy to be blown whatever way, the wind may blow. And so I love talking with my friend, David Parker here. David, as I mentioned, is the author of two wonderful books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative, his latest book. And he's joining us from San Francisco. Hey, David, how are you today?
Fine, Tom. Thanks for inviting me on the program.
Absolutely. I love our conversations. I learn something new every single time. And it's funny. I remember when I was working at CBS News for the Charles Kuralt show, one of our video editors said, hey, Tom, all of you producers, we had about 20 producers. I was one of them. Come back with our big box of videotapes. Now everything's digital, I'm sure, but it's like, let's put the story together. I'm going to write the script, and it's about whatever it may be. It might be about a jazz musician. It might be about an environmental campaign of some kind. And he said, you guys never really give the context. You're immersed in it. And so I'd like to take a moment now, with that in mind, and go back and say, what exactly do you mean by a San Francisco conservative? Is it like a white tiger in the jungle? I mean, there's only one. And are you calling yourself a San Francisco conservative?
Yes, I'm the only conservative in the whole Bay Area.
There's
9 million people. There's not one other conservative.
There might be another one.
No.
Okay.
That's why it's a good title. So it's why I can put in parentheses, but I didn't, not that conservative. After all, I'm from San Francisco here. I'm a classical liberal. You could say classical conservative in that sense. All my friends, all my family are romantic liberals. They're compassionate. They're from the heart. Let's come together as a community with our best people and spend whatever it takes and solve societal problems. And I'm saying, I'm Apollo. I'm reason. Life doesn't work that way. You can't solve personal problems. And most societal problems are personal. It's not because of capitalism or racism or anything like that. Those problems are definitely there, but they're there in every society. And we forget, we're blaming the US as if we're the only country that does bad things. We do them less than other countries. So in the end, you can't make an excuse. And the way every minority in San Francisco, and maybe ever in the country, resolves their problems is they turn within to their own community. They get an education, they get a job skill, and they provide that to their community. And the market hears about that. What? And they come over. If you're a Black and you're trained as an architect, and nobody will hire you. Eric Dolphy is one of the composers I play for my jazz band. He auditioned for the LA Philharmonic to play clarinet. And they told him, don't audition. We're never going to hire you. You're Black. Don't leave. We're not going to hire you. So he became a great jazz composer and musician. You just, you can't make an excuse.
Yeah.
So he worked with the Black community, became a great jazz person. Then the community came to him. Everybody was hiring Eric Dolphy after a while. So that's how a Black architect will get hired, working for Black clients. And if he does something good, they want him. The Negro Baseball League is my other example. They play better than the National League. One year, the Dodgers wanted the pennant so bad. Okay, forget this. All you guys come on over here, and we want you on the Dodgers. One person at a time, but that's how it works.
Yeah.
You turn within, and then the slide will come to you if you're really good.
Yeah. No, that's a great. It's true. It's definitely true. I remember I was thinking about this the other day when I was a young kid growing up in the 1960s. I was born last month of 1959. And so my parents gave me little biographies, biographies for kids. I remember they gave me one about Marian Anderson, who sang on the Mall in Washington, D.C.
Right.
Used to, years later, I'd moved to that area. But again, talent so great, it can't be denied. And they're like Jackie Robinson. So
yeah, because money doesn't know about color.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to what you said about I don't know if you literally said it like this, but I think you said that common sense, you spoke about reason versus the romantic heart. And I think when people, with historians or even people writing books on politics, a couple of years from now, look back on 2022, they're going to see this, headbutting between President Biden and Senator Joe Manchin. And it's funny that earlier this year, every year there's a journalists banquet in Washington, D.C. I never went, but I remember my bosses putting on their tuxedos, going out to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. So when Trevor Noah, the late night host from South Africa, talented guy, I think he's so funny, speaking of excellence, spoke, he said, "It's an honor just to be in the same room as the most important man in America, if not the world, Senator Manchin. I hope you're having a good evening." So I don't know if Joe Biden ever put it quite like this when he took office in early 2021, if he wanted to be another FDR, but he had these huge chunks of legislation that would cost trillions and trillions of dollars. And now that we happen to have a Senate that's 50-50 divided, they're saying, "Hey, Senator Joe Manchin, you're being so difficult." And he says, "I'm concerned about inflation. I can't go back to my very conservative state of West Virginia and just put forth this plan that's going to cost trillions and trillions of dollars." Is that what we're talking about when you talk about reason? And, we need to look under the hood, or what's the price tag of this legislation?
There should be no political argument without numbers. Most political arguments do not have underlying facts. The war on poverty was to cure poverty in this nation once and for all. In 1964, poverty was 15%, and we spent trillions.
Now knocked down to zero. There is no poverty, right? Was it successful?
Yeah, and poverty remained 15% up to this day, on average. And we have spent 23 trillion, 3 times more than all the wars we've ever fought in. And that 23 trillion is national debt. It's all paid for by borrowing. All taxes are paid for by the middle class. The rich are not paying taxes. You can't get it from them, and you can't get it from the poor. But Europe does get it from the poor. Europe has a 50% tax rate. They don't realize it because their federal tax is 25. Looks reasonable, but they have what's called a value-added tax. Any item you purchase in a restaurant, or it says at the bottom, TVA, tax for value added, about 25, 26%. So the poor are paying that. They're paying anything they purchase, which is all their money they have, is taxed at 25. They're paying 25% additional tax. So they're getting it from the poor and the middle class. The rich, if they go to a restaurant, they don't care if they're paying 25% tax on the food relative to what their income is. It doesn't show up on the graph.
Yeah.
So they're not really paying tax.
Yeah.
So we're not saying that. And so the arguments red and blue, it's really over a literal versus an expansive interpretation of the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you can be taxing middle Americans 50, 60, 70% of their income. It's that's what we're fighting over.
Yeah, well, we're having I would say a technicolor episode right now, this conversation, speaking about Black individuals, probably brown individuals, and two white guys here, and our wonderful producer and editor, Mark Allen, just raised a point. I was just looking over their note, and he said, green is the only color, really. Green is the only color that really matters. Not that life should only be about money, obviously, but I love what you've written, David, about what, is it Adam Smith and the Invisible Hand? Like, get government out of our lives, because these, it's like natural laws, right?
To the extent government is influencing the economy, prices of all goods and services are higher. Why don't we give the poor a break and have no government and have the price of all goods and services be a third? Healthcare would cost 1/3. Clearly, before Medicare, which is a big budget item paid for by borrowing, the cost of health insurance was the same as auto insurance or life insurance or property insurance even on $1 million home, about $200 a month. And a young person, $50 a month in 2022. Just get government out of it completely. That'd be a big break for the nation. Then if you can't afford health insurance, then you do a means tested. Can you afford $100? All right, the state will chip in $100. If you can't get it from a charity, which you probably could, if you can't get it from a charity, the state will be a safety net. And that way, we don't want anybody without health insurance. That's a form of universal health insurance, but you pay for it. And we subsidize those who can't quite pay for it.
Yeah,
that's reasonable. That's reason, and that's using money and then using numbers too.
Yeah. Well, I just want to pause for one moment for viewers and listeners who might be joining us at this point, kind of midstream in this conversation. This is a San Francisco conservative. You're looking at a San Francisco conservative. I guess I'm an East Coast liberal for that, but that's a different show. We'll do that. We'll do that other series. But David Parker is author of Income and Wealth and a San Francisco conservative. And David, in those two brilliant books, you do make the case for the fact that the least government in our lives is the best government. But I have to ask you, again, you told us how, if you really track it year by year, when Lyndon Johnson imposed, declared war on poverty, and it was 15%, and it's remained at 15%. Maybe it's fluctuated, but it's still at 15%. But there's nothing, when I think about an issue like that, I think, well, you do have to think about the historical context as well. That was the era, obviously, of the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King. There were some riots in the cities. I mean, a little bit perhaps like Black Lives Matter now, or what we saw 2 or 3 years ago after George Floyd killing and whatnot. It's like people were burning down buildings, protesters really on both sides, I'm sure. But is the government appropriate to get involved in things then? I mean, maybe Lyndon Johnson was doing the right thing, but you're saying you have to look at the numbers, and it did not work, right?
The civil rights movement was about Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King both says it's Martin Luther King less, but he had the good sense to keep his mouth shut and just stick to equality before the law. He says, we're not asking for preferential treatment. King would have liked preferential treatment, but he kept his mouth shut on that regard during the civil rights movement. Equality before the law. We walk into a restaurant, we walk into a government service, anywhere. There's no difference between a black or a white person, how they're treated. That was the civil rights movement. And the Constitution reinforces that. I was a kind of a civil rights activist myself. I really believe that. I've been teaching in low income and racially diverse, ethnically diverse schools. I love that environment. And I hear examples of mistreatment all the time. So I'm very, very keenly aware, but that shouldn't be allowed. That's all.
Yeah.
That's all. Equality before the law.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
So, Madison wrote much of the Constitution. And he said before he started, he couldn't understand why we need a government. He was finally convinced that not all men are angels, the famous line. There's some pretty bad people out there. So, all right, a government is a neutral third party So citizens don't take the law in their own hands. That protects everybody equally. Protect, but not provide. Not here's a check for healthcare. Here's a check for food. That was never anybody's in anybody's mind.
Yeah. I was, thinking back to when I got my start in the news business at CBS News in Washington around 1982, 81. So it's the tail end of the Reagan era and the start of the Clinton era. And I remember, his advisor, who still, commentates on CNN. I don't know if commentates is the right word, but we hear from him, James Carville, I think it was, who said, it's the economy, stupid. So it's reaching in your wallet. How much does a gallon of gasoline cost? What's the interest rate, declared by the Federal Reserve, and that kind of thing. And I could be wrong, but it seems to me that we're beginning to hear less about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont as far as classical progressives, if that's the right description, because people are feeling the economic pinch. Do you think, again, at the end of the day, do we all wake up to the economic forces, and that really is how things are resolved in terms of government policy, or should be?
Probably. I'm not experiencing real economic problems. When I'm a San Francisco landlord, and what comes down is actually insulting. It seems unconstitutional. It seems like we're living in a socialist city. It really bothers me. But people who are well off, which is a problem, don't complain, because when citizens are asking for government to step in and do this and this and that, it always ends up being in the favor of big business, always. And so nobody's complaining. We have rent control in San Francisco. That's a symptom of an underlying problem of constricting construction. The demand for housing in San Francisco is 3 times the supply of housing. So a single family home in San Francisco is worth 3 times what it should be. So if a tenant is paying a couple $100 a month less rent, the landlord doesn't care. But the tenants keep adding constrictions and constriction. But as long as they have that tenant progressive control your environment mentality, those people who have wealth are indifferent, because it just makes them create more wealth for the rich every time you constrain the economy.
Yeah.
Smaller business can't handle the constraint.
Yeah.
We have what's called Sarbanes-Oxley, Dodd-Frank, big constraints on business. It costs millions of dollars a year just in attorney's fees to comply. And big business goes, yeah, bring it on, because the smaller firms can't handle that. And they gobble them all up. It creates monopoly. It's the worst. Government should just not be involved in the economy.
Yeah.
It should not be involved in our speech. It should not be involved in our politics. Everyone has the vote. That's Thomas Jefferson. Irregardless of wealth or social status, there's no need for government.
Well, on that note of everyone should have the vote, I totally agree. And I think we're out of time for this episode. Fortunately, we'll have many more to come. So thank you, David. I really appreciate it. It's great.
All right. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'll, before we close, I'll just remind our viewers and our listeners, make sure to pick up copies of David's books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative. You can do that by visiting his website, davidparkeressays.com, or by going to Amazon. So thanks again, and I'll catch you next time.
Good.